Yes, awesome. All right, so today we're going to talk about Vue components. So my name is Julián, but you can call me Juli for short. I come from a beautiful city in Colombia called Bogota. It's the capital of Colombia. And some things sometimes are upside down, but most of the times it's a pretty amazing city. You can follow this amazing Colombian photographer at Monzoom Photo. And you might be wondering why I'm all the way here from Colombia in Melbourne. So I came here to work at Weeploy. It's a company where we're building technology to empower job seekers in the search for their next awesome job. But for today, I'll be working for a very legit company called Unexpected Events, where we use Rails to build our most successful product called Party of Thrones. So it's not Darth of Thrones, it's Party of Thrones. That typography is terrible. Anyway, so it's Friday, it's after lunch, and I think I have a little bit more time to tackle one more story. So it looks pretty simple. As a user, I want to see the guest lists of my party, so I know if people are coming or not. So it seems pretty simple. I take a look at the prototype. It doesn't look too complicated. So let's zoom in and see what this prototype has. So at the top, we have something pretty simple. It's just a party name and the party description built in action text. So this should be pretty simple. I think we can skip this one. However, if we focus on the guest list, this has a little bit more to it. So let's see at one of those invitations. So we have something that looks like an avatar that has some initials in it from the user. So we have Bruce Bolton to the left and Rob Stark to the right. And they also have like their name in there, and they have the state of the invitation. So Bruce is prepared to go and Rob is dying to go. He's very excited. And we also have some transit predictions. So by foot, you take 49 days, by horse 27, and by dragon 36. So if you're into dragons, you can get there pretty fast. So we are ready to code. I'm ready to code. So I write everything inside of my party's show template. It's a pretty standard server-side render Rails app, so it should be pretty simple. However, in here I see the potential for one of Rails' most simple and beautiful abstraction that took me ages to understand, and it's render some collection. So when I render this collection, it's going to use a partial. So I'm going to abstract everything inside of that had to do with the invitation into a partial. So this is pretty standard Rails. We have an instance local variable called invitation because of what we used. So it's pretty magical in that sense. So 4:59 p.m. I'm done. So it's almost 5. It's a Friday, yeah. So what do we do on Fridays? Everyone, we merge to master. All right, yeah, we have tests. We should be able to merge to master, right? So I'm home. Apparently I throw my bag out the window. I take my hat and rip off my shirt. And then I check my computer and the app's down. So why was that? Invitations had multiple edge cases that I didn't consider. So users may or may not have an avatar and may or may not have a full name. And I actually forgot to add colors to the invitation fields depending on the state. So the designer was pretty mad about this, so I had to jump in and do some hot fixes from home. So I rush in, and for the avatar, I just check that the avatar URL for the user is present, and if not, I check if the name is present and just render the initials, or else I just render NN. And for the username, I check again that the name is present. If not, I'm going to say anonymous user. And for the pills colors, I do like this cutting edge technique that's called nesting ternary operators that we all know that is super readable and it's super easy to maintain, right? But whatever, I needed to fix this pretty fast, so I just did it. And I end up with a new partial that's filled with logic. And what do we say to logic in the Vue? We say no, right? And okay, so maybe we can write some of those methods in the model. No, fat models. We know that models shouldn't have anything that has to do with Vue logic, right? It has to deal with some other stuff. So maybe we write a Rails helper. Yeah, maybe. Rails helpers tend to be a little bit confusing as they live in a global scope. They're great when they're very, very generic things like link to or number to currency, some of those pretty nice Rails helpers. So maybe we extract into partials. It's not such a bad idea. Partials are good. They have pretty good use cases. However, a problem with partials is that there's no interface to deal with them. We don't declare what the arguments are, and we don't declare the variables that it has access to. It's a little bit too magical sometimes, and it makes them more difficult to maintain and to reason about. So more experienced developers say, yeah, use presenters. Presenters are the way to go. And yes, presenters are fine too. However, it's 2020 and we found some better abstractions of the, or some better evolutions of the presenter patterns, which are components, right? So how about that if we use components? That's what we're here for, right? So let's install React. And thank you for your attention. All right, no, that was a pretty bad joke. We're gonna use Vue components. So Vue components are a gem built by GitHub and used in production by GitHub. They're inspired by the component pattern that React has honed through the years. And it's a framework for building Vue components that are reusable, testable, and encapsulated in Ruby on Rails. And this last bit is very important. The design philosophy for this is that they're designed to integrate as seamlessly as possible with Rails with the least surprise. So the development team has taken a lot of time and effort into making components feel as native to Rails as possible. And they are merging commits into Rails to make that happen. So let's dive right in. So to install the gem, just bundle, add Vue component, or add gem Vue component to your gem file. And in your application, you have to require the Vue component engine. All of these instructions are also in the README for the gem. And as this is meant to work very, very close to Rails, it has a generator. So you can use Rails G or Rails generate component invitation. And it's going to create 3 files: an invitation component test, an invitation component RB file, and a template. So the most basic anatomy of a Vue component is the following. It's just a Ruby file and an HTML template. So Vue components are just Ruby objects. They are enhanced by inheriting from Vue component base, but they're just Ruby objects. They can have arguments, class methods, constants, instance methods, you name it. It's the same thing you're already using to model the rest of your app. You can use the same techniques you used for your domain modeling, like keyword arguments, dependency injection, dependency direction and reversal, isolation of extraneous dependencies. Here, a big shout out to my Roro book club. This is all the things that we're learning in the Roro book club. And Sandy would be so proud of us when we use Vue components in that way. So before, when we rendered a collection, we use render and the collection that we prepared in our controller. In here, I'm going to loop through all of the invitations and render a new instance of the component. So I just initialize it as a regular Ruby object. So invitation component.new, and inside I can have as many arguments as I want. So where do I define these arguments? I define them in my Ruby file. So for this example, I'm passing in the invitation. I'm injecting the dependency of the invitation. And inside, I can have attribute readers. I can define defaults. I can define fallbacks. So for example, I have an avatar URL attribute reader and a name and state attribute readers with some fallbacks. So to refactor the avatar that we had before, I can just use that avatar URL attribute reader method. And if it's present, I use the helpers proxy to use Rails helpers. And I just write things as I would inside of a Rails view. So image tag avatar URL with some class. If the avatar is not present, it's just initials, but it's all within a Ruby file. And then in my HTML file, I just write an ERP tag with the avatar method in it. So no logic in the view. Next, let's refactor this very nasty ternary, nested ternary, right? So before we had this, that was pretty difficult to read, very hard to refactor. Now we can have the following. Now we could have a constant with the different states for the invitation and what the color corresponds for each of those states. And then I can just have a call to that hash with the key that's the state. In my HTML file, I can just interpolate the name of the class and just call state.humanized for it to be presented to the user in a very readable way. By the way, in Rails 6.1, we're going to have a method to add classes in HTML files, so it's going to be even easier. And then to refactor the transit predictions, I did this a little bit complex on purpose to show you what we could do. So in here, as this is just Ruby, we can create Ruby dynamically with Rails methods. So we can use content tag to create divs with some classes, and then concatenate some other HTML string, and at the end, just join everything and output an HTML safe string. And in my view, I would just have transit predictions. So this is how the HTML file for this ended up being. Before we had all of the logic in the view, now all of the logic, it's on the RB file. However, by doing this and by using objects, we can now see abstractions much easier. So without changing anything inside the view, I can refactor my avatar method to render an avatar component. So I just Rails generate avatar with the URL and initials, and I can have all of the logic for an avatar in a new abstraction, in a new object. And now my avatar component is reusable throughout my whole app if I pass in the correct arguments. And we ended up with exactly the same view. So the user doesn't notice anything at all, but our views are much, much more reusable now. So what are the advantages of using this? The view logic is now explicit. The dependencies are explicit. And it's easier to see newer abstractions, and it's easier to refactor stuff. So people have some common questions when we talk about view component. So can I have children like I do in React? And the answer is yes. You can have multiple content areas and you can name them. So you can have multiple content areas with view components. Can I render collections? Yes. Instead of looping as I did, you can use the with collection method, and you can say just render invitation component with collection, and you pass in the collection to it. Can it test components? Yes, and this is one of the most exciting things about Vue components, that now components are unit testable. So you can test them using capybara matchers, simple matchers, or just the raw HTML output if you want. Can I preview them? Yes, they work just like mailer previews. So you can go to a specific URL within the Rails engine, and you can preview all of your components. There's even someone building a gem to make this work with Storybook.js for the people who like Storybook. Should I pass instances as arguments like I did, or more granular information? That's up to you. It depends on the coding style of your team and how comfortable you are with passing active record objects into Vue components, but it's totally doable. Do I need to manage state? No, because this Vue components their sole responsibility is to output HTML. So how can I make them interactive? You can just use Stimulus.js. If you haven't, it's a very, very nice gem by the team at Basecamp to handle interaction for server-side render apps. And Vue components paired with things like stimulus reflex, cable ready, and the new stuff coming TurboLink 6, it makes it an absolute pleasure to build server-side rendered apps that are super fast, super responsive, and very robustly built. Where do my styles go? They can go anywhere you want. You can have sidecar assets. You can have your plain old CSS files even. But some people are worried about JS and CSS leaking. For that, you can use web components, and it's also supported. And that was it, a very, very quick lightning talk about Vue components. If you want to know more about the gem, you can go to the Vue component repo, and I'm gonna have the code for this in my GitHub account. So you can go to github.com/my username, Pinzón Julián, and you'll be able to see the code for this presentation there. Any questions from anyone in the audience?
I think I have one question.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think that's really good, Jim, to reflect the existing ERB templates for the old Vue components. But I think this tool, do you think this tool is only for refactoring those existing ERB files, or you think it's a competitive way when we compare it to the the API and React, the pattern?
So this gem is like its main focus is on server-side rendered apps. So for example, GitHub uses it extensively because of the technique they use for their app is rendering stuff from the server and then updating specific components using something similar to TurboLinks that's called PJAX. So it's a different use case than React because it's not about building a single page app with them. And that's why I said their responsibility is not to manage state nor manage interactivity. However, you can build the same or almost the same type of interactivity with these components and regular server-side render techniques than you would by using React. So they're two different approaches, but with the same mindset of abstracting the logic into a separate file, for example.
Thank you, Julián. But when I choose between the two methods, between the React and this one Vue component, so what's the the main factor, like the main thing I need to consider before I choosing those two?
So those the decision is a pretty big one because it relates to, or it has to do with how you want to build your team and your whole app. So do you want to have a front-end team handling all the JS stuff for React and a back-end team doing all the back-end and maintaining the API? If that's the case and your app really needs to be a single-page app with React, well, you have your answer there. However, if you think that it's better to have a smaller team that can manage front-end and back-end in a monolith, Vue components is an awesome way to have the same benefits that you have in React with JSX and all of the abstractions that component bring, but within the context of a Rails monolith.
Thank you very much. That makes sense.
Sure, Ethan.
How would you compare these two Trailblazer's cells or DryRB's dry Vue gems?
They are definitely very similar, and this is by no means a new concept in the Ruby or Rails community. I haven't used those before, so I wouldn't be able to have a complete answer. However, this gem is built very, very closely with the Rails core team. So it's like the compatibility with Rails is going to be, or it is right now, is very strong. And
so it's endorsed by the Rails team?
Yes, in a way. Actually, when it was first announced, it was announced as a gem that was going to be pulled into Rails core. However, they've decided not to do it, but they, like, through this gem, we now have support in Rails 6.1 for rendering objects. So just as we used render and the instance of an object, people can build their own libraries that use objects instead of partials or templates. So in that sense, I think it's different because the intention is to bridge a little bit the gap that we had in front-end Rails for a long time.
Cool, thanks.
Sure, Brendan.
Are styling components a thing in this Vue component world?
So no, this is like as I said, the main objective of this components of this abstraction is just to output HTML, like raw HTML. Yeah, you can scope styles by using web components. However, Safari still doesn't have complete support for them, but it is something that you can do. You can scope styles to a component with HTML's web components. But no, it's different in that sense from React and like style components. However, I don't know if you saw, I'm using Tailwind, and Tailwind is a little like a good in between for that matter. So it's a good match using Tailwind with Vue components.
What is Tailwind?
Tailwind is something we're going to hear in our next talk. Yeah, it's a CSS library that's pretty awesome.
That's a really good segue.